Lois.
Hi, Haley. Oh my goodness, it's good to see you. I missed the last one, and I
know
needed
we missed you.
my bi-weekly podcast fix. So I'm really glad to be here this time. So good to see
I'm
you.
so glad you are too. We missed you and welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody, to Women in Digital Talks. We're excited to be here. Just a couple of announcements before we bring our guest on and get started today. The Women in Digital Awards for 2026. It's 2026
Yeah.
now, yeah. Our 5th annual Women in Digital Awards.
Yeah.
The nomination deadline has been extended to the 18th of May. So if you had somebody in mind, if you were in the middle of filling out your nomination form, if you were getting some additional input and the deadline of May 4th passed, the good news is you've got some extra time to get that nomination in. I know I personally found myself in that spot where I was about halfway through some nominations. So I'm glad that we've got the extended deadline. So really, really great response so far.
And
lots of great candidates.
Please do it, because it's just it's a great way to bring someone who maybe has had a great year, or they haven't really gotten a lot of recognition, or sometimes you feel like you do so much work and it's just like, it's a great way to just shed some light on someone. And it's been such a great program for so many women. So please
Absolutely.
Please make the time.
We've met so many amazing women, and we've got one of them with us today. So Anna Murcar is joining us. She was our Rockstar Leader winner in 2025. So let's bring Anna on.
Hi. Hello.
Hi, Anna. Hello.
So nice to see you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Anna, you're joining us from the UK, yes?
I am just about 5 miles north of London. So I work in London, but I live in the countryside, in all the British, beautiful kind of green fields around London. So I get the best of both worlds.
So nice to have you.
Amazing.
I'm looking forward to our conversation. So Lois, maybe can you hang out and join us toward the end? Thank you.
See you soon. All right. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. Anna, you are the Director of Enterprise Technologies at one of the most recognizable brands in media in the world, the BBC. So I want to start there. You've spent your entire career at the BBC. Hopefully our audience is familiar with the BBC, but if you're not, you can find the BBC just about everywhere. So talk about what it was like to join in a technology field almost 30 years ago compared to what it's like today. And what about your career and growth and opportunities that you've had at the BBC has kept you there for so long?
Yeah, well, thank you. And yeah, the BBC, I can't say how proud I am to work there. I've been here 24 years this year. Total privilege, working somewhere which is, really aligned to your values and purpose, where you're really kind of passionate about what it does. It's really for the greater good, especially through the World Service and its ability to, its global influence as a kind of trusted media brand, kind of quite a strategic British asset, and how important it is around fighting disinformation, protecting the truth. It's been a privilege and an honor to work here. So I'm really glad. I started 24 years ago as a training administrator. Very quickly recognized my passion for technology, not just in terms of just the tech, but also in terms of how it has the ability to kind of bring people, data, processes, everything together to create a kind of an experience. And it's so important, not just alongside a culture in an organization and helping shape a culture, is the technology that kind of enables the work that we do. So it's really thinking about how that comes together, not just as a piece of technology, but how it fits into how an organization works end to end. So what I would say is, 30 years ago, or 24, it felt very much.
I know I added years. I'm sorry. Yeah, I rounded up. I'm in sales, so I'm used to rounding up.
No, fair enough. It did feel that technology was more of a back office function when I first started. I think now, the massive difference is very little of what happens in an organization isn't underpinned by technology in some form. And, we are a horizontal function that supports the entire organization, from everything from commissioning ideas to transmission of programs to paying our people, our suppliers, tax, treasury, legal. It's everywhere. It supports communications. It's, and now the BBC proudly thinks of itself not just as a kind of content making organization or a distribution and sales business, but also a technology company. So, now technology is very much at the forefront of all the conversations, from the ideas, and we are an integral part to making it evolve. So, in a very competitive market, a very competitive media landscape, it is absolutely the thing that is making the difference between where you succeed and where you don't. So I think in that 24 years, it's shifted from being just something that actually you need to run something to actually being the thing that actually will deliver the strategic edge for an organization. So I think it has massively shifted the way in which kind of technology is seen in an organization. And, we are at the forefront and we're having those conversations, and you feel part of the organization and its growth strategy.
Talk a little bit about your own personal journey along that road, because it wasn't too long after you joined the BBC that you were elevated to a leadership position. And you've had, over the years, increasing leadership responsibilities. And so I imagine, with the growth and importance of technology, talk a little bit about what that's been like for you, because at the same time, technology is becoming more and more important, more and more foundational to what the BBC's brand is. Here are you in an increasing leadership responsibility. So just talk a little bit about that personal side.
So, I've always been really lucky to have champions and allies around me, and I mean both men and women. And I've always been quite driven in terms of, proudly driven in terms of thinking about my career. Someone who always wants to kind of step into a challenge, works out how to, network, grow my understanding of the work we do, think much more holistically, and join dots and connections across organizations. And I think, again, that's very much an important part of what a technology leader can do. But it hasn't been always the smoothest journey, because obviously along the way of, wanting to progress my career, I've also had two beautiful children, and obviously taken, certainly I've taken whole years off. So I've taken 2 whole years out of my career at different points to have my first, who's 8, and my second, who's 4. And that comes with, challenges. You start having your own, I'm always open. I'm always vulnerable and open to being, talking about my vulnerabilities. But, you feel like you've stepped back. Am I losing out? Am I going to be able to come back and be as effective as I was before? Have I lost anything in terms of the way the technology rapidly evolves? If you take a year out, will I be able to keep up? Well, things have changed. So, I have had brilliant leaders and allies and champions around me. I've had brilliant teams, and I've taken real thought and care about the teams that I build and the culture that we have in those teams, so that people are supported through all the journeys that they take. I've got a very flexible approach to work, and I install that in my teams to make it as fully inclusive as possible. People have different, whether it's children, whether caring responsibilities, whether they want to get involved in different things outside the organization. We have that flexibility. So I always say it's not always been the easiest. I don't like to always, to pretend that it's been every day I've got up and thought, oh, this is easy. I know what I'm going to do today. The work can often become chaotic and hectic, but I think it's around also being able to ask for support and demonstrating your own vulnerabilities, creating that sense of team and psychological safety. We don't all have it nailed every day. It's not easy. And I've spent a lot of time making sure but also championing others to feel empowered to ask for what they need and the support they need to do that. So I'm really grateful for the support I've received, but I also do recognize that I have put myself into positions and opened myself up to lean in and say, I'm here. I've got the experience. I can do this, and not put a glass ceiling on myself through that process.
I think that's such an interesting point, not putting a glass ceiling on yourself. What guidance would you give our audience about that? Because I imagine, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would imagine that there were some times when you may have thought, I'm going to take a step back. It's too much. I want to have this work-life balance. I want to raise these kids. Maybe I'll just do X, Y, or Z and not progress through this leadership path. So what made the difference for you? How did you sort of reconcile that? Because I can't imagine that was an easy.
Yeah. It's not been, and you know, one of my eldest, for example, and one of the probably the trickiest years of my life, you know, being ambitious, wanting to drive my career, being proud of the work that I've done, you know, always wanting to step forward. My son was diagnosed with ADHD. He's autistic and ADHD, dyspraxic, and he had a very challenging first year to school. And I found myself carrying immense guilt that I was, you know, during the day working, he was going into after school clubs, breakfast clubs. Was I doing the right thing? How was I, you know, do I need to step back? My children will always come first to me, but actually I do believe there's a role that you can play, both being a working mother and raising children beautifully, about being very purposeful with your time. So yeah, I can't lie, there have been some moments where I've thought, do I need to step back? And I think at those points, it is where you should, you know, I thought, no, I'm going to step into this. I'm going to display my vulnerabilities. I'm going to explain to work what is happening. I'm going to ask for their support. And when you do that, you do find that there are people that step forward. There are people who understand. You know, I probably been very lucky with that. I hope that is more pervasive now, of people understanding much more around the balance of work and life, and especially whether it's SEN or caring responsibilities, that, you know, these things aren't easy. But I think through that, not only have I learned how to ask for help myself or to say what I need, but also that it's okay for some days to just feel hard. And that doesn't mean that you are failing, or it doesn't mean that you're being a bad mum, or it doesn't mean that you're terrible at your job. Some days are just tough, and it, you know, not to beat yourself up about that. And then, but what I have used it for, and I've used it to strengthen, is actually to be not only to give myself confidence that, you know, I came through that year. I now have a brilliant relationship with my son. We have worked out the support he needs. And for any parent who's got SEN children, that is not easy. That is a big battle you have to go through. But now I use that voice to champion for others. You know, I effectively will say, you know, I walked into my interview for this particular job, for this directorship role, and one of the questions at the end is, can I please do 4 days a week? Now, 10 years ago, I'd never have asked for that. I would have felt really nervous asking for that. But actually, I thought, I've demonstrated that I can do this role. I've taught you about, I'm going to ask. And you know what? They said yes. So it's given me, so I had a very wobbly year, not gonna lie, but it's given me the confidence you can come through this if you find the right people and allyship around you. That, you know, I don't know if I agree with the you can have it all, but what you can do is find a way that works for you and for your family. And that will be different for everyone. So there's not a one size template, but you can find a way that works. And some days you will feel like you're being a brilliant mother, but actually there's some plates smashed on the floor around you at work. And some days you think, oh, I wasn't there for, I'm sorry, not to be too emotional, but, you know, I don't feel like I gave my child enough cuddles today, but actually, oh my gosh, I got that program signed off. That's brilliant. So it's not easy. It is a give and take every day. And I think you have to be prepared to kind of flex a bit, that you're never going to have everything perfect.
As you were talking, what occurred to me was how much you're leading by example, because it always helps to have someone who's gone before, who has faced the challenges that you're experiencing or something similar, and who's come through it and advocated for herself. And watching that example makes it much, much easier for the next person in line to do the same thing. How much was that a part of what gave you the strength to do what you've done?
Oh, a huge part, because I think, you know, if you think back to the time, and I won't get all the dates right and the times right, you know, if women aren't championing women or in championing inclusion more generally, because, you know, at times we have felt, you know, the minority, or we haven't felt treated as equals. If we're not doing that, then we're falling into the mistakes of the past of people who have, you know, who have wronged different parts of society. So for me, it's absolutely vital. For example, I came back 4 days a week. Why shouldn't any of my team work 4 days a week? I have 8 out of 10 of my leadership team do condensed 4-day working patterns. But by giving them that flex and the trust we have, the days they don't normally work, if I need something, they do it, because it's a give and take, right? So you've given trust, you've empowered people with trust. That was what's given to me, and that phrase "pay it forward," that's really important. You have to be an authentic leader today for people to actually want to follow you. Leadership is different to management, isn't it? Management's just kind of task stuff. That is task. Leadership is people wanting to follow you, to want to believe in the goals and what you're trying to achieve, and the ability for them to trust you, to take them on that journey and to look after them as you do that. It's been so important to me to make sure that what I have learned, what I have been afforded with mentorship, allyship, support, I absolutely then pass on to others, because I know how difficult and daunting it is. I've lived the walk. It's daunting coming back from maternity leave for everyone. It's daunting coming back from. You need people who understand that. I think it's really important.
I want to shift gears a little bit. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that. I know our audience is always so enriched by hearing about other people's journeys. So I do, though, want to shift gears. So there is probably no other industry than media where AI is having such an impact across the board. So from your perspective as an enterprise technology leader inside an organization that's facing both threats and opportunities from AI, talk a little bit about how you think about that. Everything from the content that's being produced at the BBC to the services that you provide. I know you think and care a lot about the ethical use of AI. Can you just talk a little bit about the impact that that's had inside the BBC and what you're thinking about along those lines?
Yeah, of course. Gosh, I mean, I can't tell you there isn't probably one meeting, or at least every other meeting I go to, that doesn't talk about AI. So it is a huge topic, and one that's hugely interesting. If I think about it in terms of the media, because obviously, I look at corporate technologies, and there's a different risk around ethics, from hire to retire processes around how we bring people in and we assess their capabilities through AI, and the ethics around that, through to AI for fraud detection, in some of my finance systems, through to obviously the media. In the media world, you've got the huge thing around mass-produced disinformation, deep fakes, propaganda, the polarization, the echo chambers. It really does threaten journalism through kind of inaccurate content. It's hugely, so it's a huge discussion point. Whilst I'm not directly a content maker in the organization or a commissioner, I know that we talk a lot about the ethical and responsible ways for truth. The BBC is a big part of it was an instigator of the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, so it's C2PA, because, making sure that we can actually verify images and content, and we know the source of that. The BBC have doing a huge piece on BBC Verify. So it's around, forensic journalism, real forensic journalism, reporting on the facts, so that, they can assess and look at some of the content that's been created that might be coming into the BBC. Is it AI generated? Is it truthful? How do we use? I mean, they do everything from geoscanning on the earth to see if the pictures are right. What it does mean is, in order for us to make sure we protect the truth with no agenda, and we, make sure we're impartial, the BBC might not always be the first to break a news story, but it wants to be truthful and right about what it says. So sometimes being first isn't always the best thing. It's about actually what you're saying is the truth. We also face quite a lot of risks from bots and LLMs wanting to suck in all the data from the BBC, algorithms that don't behave impartially. So, they can be often financially or politically motivated. So in that kind of polarized world where disinformation is such a challenge, we are really probably taking quite a cautious approach to the use of AI, and being really clear and transparent with our users. If we want to be truthful and transparent, we need to be clear when that's being used. So, for example, it's one of the things the BBC is doing is around speech to text. So you might have a punter, I don't know what you call them in the States, but someone who's oh gosh, I'm going to word bank, who's talking about, who's at the game, say a big football game, who's talking about it, but actually you want that pumped onto all the kind of the website. So we've got speech to text, AI algorithms, language conversion. So there's lots of things in test, but we have a very big responsible AI team in the BBC who are really looking at it from a data, financial, a reputational, a ethical perspective. And therefore we're not necessarily moving at huge pace, but we're actually thinking about the things that are really going to add value to the organization, but that actually still keep the trust in our brand. So not a simple answer, to be honest. And I think a lot of obviously organizations are struggling with this. How do you determine where the real value in AI sits for your organization from a productivity, from a an efficiencies perspective, but also from an experience of your brand? It's not simple.
And it sounds like the ethical framework, though, that you've developed is, or maybe it's in the process of being developed or always evolving, but it sounds like it's very much aligned with the core values at the BBC.
Oh, absolutely. It's all around that kind of trust and truth. And, truth with no agenda or impartiality, people call it slightly different things, but it is around, we have some real AI principles that we use. They're actually all publicly published because we're trying to be as transparent about it. But is it in line with our values? Is it in line with our editorial values? We have some really strong editorial frameworks that we work through. Is it fair? Is it secure? Does it respect the rights of the creators, the content, the contributors, the suppliers? Because, I'm sure you'll have read in many news, what does it mean for the actors and actresses in, around deep fakes of their work, so their rights, but also how we use it to support that kind of human insight, creativity, that kind of talent and creativity. So it's, it's not all just AI, it's how do you bring it together with people and humans to create something powerful. But we've always said as an organization that we will always be transparent. We'll be really clear with our explanations of when we use it, and we'll take accountability and have some human oversight. So we've got some real principles that we apply to the AI work that we do.
Talk a little bit about your team with respect to this, because, one of the jobs of a leader is to make sure that that ethical framework permeates downward, right, to the whole team. Compare this time, this age of AI, to another technology milestone. Maybe for the BBC, it was mobile. Maybe for the BBC, it was I don't know, satellite communication. I don't know, but compare it to another moment in time where you found yourself kind of bringing the team on a journey with a massive amount of disruption.
Do you know, I was thinking most about this because, yes, mobile, satellites, all the ways we create our own 5G networks now in the BBC to protect them, to make sure that we don't get interference. There's so much that is happening. I think the biggest shift in my career, and I think about the corporate technology landscape that I manage in this instance, was actually the move to SaaS technologies. So our software as a service, our platform as a service, taking things off premise, passing things into the cloud, thinking about the data security and the risks associated with that. You end up in very big supply chains with third parties and them taking accountability, responsibility for your data. You're starting to move to very standard processes, data architectures, that whole kind of, you can't customize. You're starting to move to a software as a service model. That has been a big journey. It's about 10 years ago now we started going on that journey to the cloud, if not more. But that was quite a seismic change for me and my teams, and everything from infrastructure teams in the BBC through to product teams who are thinking about, okay, well, how does that operate? When we've used to being able to build everything ourselves and configure it ourselves, we're now taking suppliers' technology and configuring it, not customizing it. That was quite a material shift for us. In terms of the way we operate from a people, process, data and technology perspective, that was quite a major shift for the work that teams do. And we just spent a lot of time talking about kind of the pros and cons, spending time with lots of, everything from data protection to InfoSec to, UX and D people, it's the reason it was difficult is because you feel like you're losing a little bit of control when you've had control of everything yourself, and you're actually then having to hand it off into what you can't see underneath the tin. That was quite a big mind shift set for us. And I think probably not in this as impactful as AI, but that was probably in the last kind of 10-15 years is the one that I think has been most impactful for my team, moving to that kind of as a service model for technology.
Thank you for that. So shifting gears again, we've got a question for you from our previous guest, Jayoti Chaudhry. As a reminder, she was is the leader of the Salesforce practice at Altimetric. And her question for you, Anna, is, given your role in leading corporate systems at scale, which we've learned a lot about today, so thank you, how are you balancing innovation with governance, especially in an AI-driven world where speed and control often seem to be in tension? You talked a little bit about this earlier.
It's such a good question because, especially in the world I work in supporting, legal teams, risk management teams, safety teams, if I think about safety and broadcast technology, with working in offsite, and then HR frameworks, we work in regulations around finance technologies, procurements, it's huge. That kind of governance around controls, regulation frameworks is often feel quite kind of the overwhelming part of the role. So, balancing operations and transformation is something obviously, myself, CIOs need to do regularly, because, the one hand you lower your risk tolerance, but then you're looking at risk of data loss, breaches, fines, brand reputational damage. If you don't comply with your ICFR controls, there's reputational and damaging financial fines to the organization. But the risk of then standing still is almost like going backwards in a world where technology is changing so rapidly, and if we don't keep up. So I think what I try and do is, when we talk about governance can often sound like quite a blocking word. I don't know how to describe it, but it sounds as though like you're trying to stop something. And I think it's about, you have to balance operations and transformation always in this job, in all technology jobs, because you've got to run, you've got to assure, and you've got to innovate. But I think you can do that in a way that governance doesn't have to be decision by 300 committees, and every single person has to have a voice in that, and you need 10 levels of governance to make a decision. It's about having governance, the perception of being clunky. You can have effective lightweight governance if you set it up correctly. You can have small number of empowered teams who are held to account, and you don't need a working group, a steering group, a governance level, a program board, that consult with 10 other people. You've got to kind of make that governance lightweight so that it actually manages the risk, but doesn't slow you to innovate. And I think that is the balance you've got to find, because governance can feel quite clunky if you set it up incorrectly. So that's the mission that I'm on. It's making sure that governance is effective to make sure that we don't, breach anything, but equally, and that we, are critically and assure a very important part of the BBC landscape. We pay our people, we pay our suppliers, we hire people. It's so critical to the backbone of the organisation that you have to assure it and have it resilient alongside innovating and at pace. So I think that it all comes down to how lightweight and effective your governance is, and you just don't make it too clunky.
I hope JOT's listening. That was a great answer to her question. So in a couple weeks, we're going to have Kim Hanchett on. She's the Global Senior Director of People, Technology, and Analytics, and was the winner of our Digital Innovator Award for Europe for 2025. Do you have a question for Kim?
Yeah, I am. And I'm going to focus a bit more on the analytics side, because it's obviously losing my voice. It's something that we're doing a lot of work now on, in terms of, enterprise data platforms, and the use of AI machine learning, but more of a cultural thing. How are you using people analytics, not to just inform leadership decisions, but also to enable employees to make data-driven choices, but really importantly, feel empowered in their roles? I think that for me, there's a real thing about using data to empower people. So it's more on the culture side, but how they're using data and people analytics to kind of make good choices, but empower people.
Great question. I'm excited to hear Kim's answer. let's bring Lois back on. I think Lois is going to be actually doing the conversation with Kim. So there you go, Lois. That's a good one.
It's a good one. It's a good one. So we can share that with her, and looking forward to that discussion. And thank you so much. You know, it was dawning on me with your dialogue about women kind of this goal of having it all, but in reality it's so empowering, I think, today, whereby we can almost curate where we get the most of our, you know, what's important to us. And I think because of the way technology has been able to enable us to make some really good choices and to figure out individually where we are able to spend our time, where we think is most impactful, but also have the bandwidth to be able to, you know, have the important things in our life that are truly important, such as our children and what's important to us with our families. So it's just been a great year. You are such a role model for so many of how to really pull that together and still do just such amazing things at work. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's really been impactful. So,
Anna, thanks so much for your time. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and I hope you'll join us in 2 weeks when we're talking to Kim. Thanks everybody.
all right. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.